The dusty air of the Afghan mountains clung to the boots of every soldier that trudged through the rough terrain. Among them, Captain Sarah Viper Kane looked like just another Marine sniper on deployment. She wasn't the loudest or the strongest, just another warrior in uniform blending into the sea of camouflage and rifles. Her role appeared ordinary, the kind of soldier who followed orders, scanned ridgelines, and vanished back into the shadows once her job was done. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The sun beat down hard that morning when the joint patrol with Navy SEALs moved deeper into a valley. It was supposed to be routine. Clear the route, secure the ground, and return before nightfall. But the mountains had a way of swallowing routine. Without warning, gunfire erupted from jagged cliffs. Insurgents, well-positioned and armed, launched a coordinated ambush. Bullets cracked through the air, RPGs thundered, and dust rose in choking clouds. Radios screamed with panic. Command shouted across the net that if they didn't push back immediately, the entire patrol would be wiped out. The stakes were clear. Failure meant capture or death for everyone on the ground. Chaos spread. Young soldiers ducked behind rocks, their breaths ragged, eyes wide with terror. A few shouted that they were surrounded. Some cursed, others prayed. Even among hardened warriors, doubt was contagious. Sarah felt it too, the familiar crushing weight of fear. Her mind flashed back to Fallujah, where she had once watched her best friend, another sniper, cut down by a single stray round. That memory haunted her still. She had promised herself never to hesitate again. But in that moment, the shadows of past failure clung to her chest. She pressed her cheek to the cold stock of her rifle. For a second, she almost believed the whispers of doom around her. Then slowly she inhaled. Her voice carried over the gunfire, low and steady. She admitted what she had buried inside. "I've done this before. I know how to get us out." It wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet, iron-edged certainty. The SEALs, men who had fought alongside Marcus Luttrell and read the words of Chris Kyle, glanced toward her. Some didn't believe. Some thought she was desperate. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of steel, that silenced their protests. The buildup began. Sarah steadied her rifle, her M40, its matte finish scarred from years of war. She marked every angle, every shimmer of movement on the ridge. She slowed her breathing. The environment sharpened. The echo of distant shouts, the metallic click of a bolt sliding into place, the whisper of wind across the valley. She adjusted for elevation, for wind drift, for the way the sun baked heat into the air and bent light. Seconds stretched into eternities. Every heartbeat was a countdown. The impossible moment arrived. With insurgents closing in and 2 SEALs already down, Sarah squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, echoing like thunder in the valley. Silence followed for half a breath. Then a figure on the cliff toppled, his weapon slipping from his grip. She fired again. Another fell. And another. In less than a minute, the ambush line cracked. The decisive action ignited hope. Soldiers scrambled to rally, pressing forward under her cover fire. She shifted from position to position, relentless, her scope catching threats before they could even aim. Against impossible odds, she carved open a path for survival. When the firefight finally subsided, the ground was littered with spent casings, and silence pressed in, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Sarah lowered her rifle, her arms trembling from the strain. 2 SEALs, Lieutenant Harris and Sergeant Cole, were gravely injured. Command radioed in, marking Sarah as KIA after losing contact. The unit assumed she had gone down in the chaos, but Sarah refused to let death claim her or the men under her care. She bound their wounds, lifted one across her shoulders, then dragged the other by his vest. The trek was brutal. 3 days of staggering under the Afghan sun, hiding by night, fighting off patrols with only a knife and scavenged rounds. At times, her body threatened to collapse. Her lips cracked from thirst. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, but still she moved forward. When she finally reached the base perimeter, the guards couldn't believe their eyes. A lone figure, caked in blood and dust, staggered toward them. Across her back was the limp form of one SEAL, and in her grip she dragged the other, refusing to let go. The crowd gathered in shock, jaws dropping, rifles lowering. Whispers spread. Wasn't she reported dead? How could anyone carry two men across miles of enemy terrain? Relief flooded the faces of her brothers in arms, awe and disbelief etched deep. Sarah, barely able to stand, met their stunned gazes with calm resolve. "Someone had to," she whispered before collapsing. That day her name was etched into memory. Even General James Mattis himself, upon hearing the report, ordered a personal commendation, saluting her courage in front of the entire battalion. The men who once doubted her now stood in silence, humbled. And the takeaway? Courage isn't about never feeling fear. It's about walking through it, step by step, refusing to quit when the world declares you finished. It's about responsibility. The kind that doesn't wait for orders. The kind that doesn't ask if it's possible. Sarah proved what every warrior learns too late. When you trust yourself, when you believe beyond the limit, the impossible becomes reality. The evening sun was dipping behind the jagged ridges of Helmand Province, stretching long shadows across the dusty ground. A patrol of British SAS and U.S. Navy SEALs moved carefully through a cluster of mud brick compounds. To the untrained eye, Lieutenant Emily Carter seemed like just another soldier among them. Her face streaked with dust, her helmet shadowing her eyes, her L-85A2 rifle slung casually as though she had carried it her entire life. She wasn't loud, nor did she carry herself like someone seeking recognition. To most, she appeared ordinary, another professional lost in the rhythm of war. Then it happened. A thunderous explosion ripped through the air as an IED detonated under the lead vehicle. The shockwave tore through the patrol, throwing men to the ground. Dust and debris filled the sky as gunfire erupted from hidden positions all around. Insurgents poured bullets into the shattered formation, their shouts echoing through the narrow alleys. Radios crackled with chaos. Reports were sent back to HQ. Patrol hit. Heavy casualties. Lieutenant Emily Carter presumed KIA the stakes were life or death. If the patrol didn't fight their way out, they'd be wiped out before reinforcements could arrive. And for Emily, if she failed to rise now, two severely injured SEALs beside her would be left behind to die in the dirt. Fear spread quickly. Soldiers shouted that they were surrounded. A young SEAL gripped his weapon with shaking hands, whispering that there was no way out. Even hardened men muttered about holding position and praying for backup that might never come. Emily felt the weight, too. Her lungs still rattled from the blast, her body aching and her ears ringing from the concussion. For a moment, doubt whispered inside her, reminding her of Kandahar 2 years ago, when a similar ambush had taken half her team before dawn. The memory threatened to shatter her focus, but then she pushed through. She forced herself to breathe, to steady her voice, and she admitted what no one else could. "I've been here before. I know how to fight out of this. It wasn't arrogance. It was the voice of someone who had carried scars from battles no one else survived." The others looked at her, some in disbelief, some clinging desperately to hope. What mattered was that Emily believed herself. The build-up began as she crouched low, sighting through her rifle's optics. Her hands were steady despite the chaos. Every sound sharpened. The click of the magazine, the crunch of boots over sand, the faint rattle of loose stone under an enemy's step. The village around her was a labyrinth of walls and alleys, each shadow hiding possible death. She mapped it in her head, recalling her SAS training. Every angle mattered. Every line of sight could decide life or death. Time slowed as she raised her rifle. She adjusted for the dying light, compensated for dust hanging in the air, and placed her crosshairs on the figure sprinting with an RPG. She squeezed the trigger. The man collapsed. She shifted instantly, dropping another before he could line up a shot. Her precision broke the ambush line just enough for the surviving soldiers to regroup. But Emily wasn't just shooting her way out. She was fighting for the two SEALs bleeding beside her. With rounds whipping overhead, she dragged them into cover, her back straining under their weight. She used her combat medic training, pressing gauze into wounds, tying tourniquets with hands that refused to tremble. She whispered promises to the unconscious men. "I'm not leaving you. Not today." The firefight stretched into the night. When ammunition ran low, Emily scavenged weapons from fallen enemies, even wielding an AK when her rifle jammed. She fought through alleys, using the shadows to mask her movement, her training turning fear into a deadly calm. Like a ghost, she appeared where enemies least expected, striking, then vanishing again. When the village finally quieted, Emily faced the impossible task, getting the 2 wounded SEALs back to base, across miles of hostile territory. Command had written her off as dead, and no one was coming for her. She had only herself, her weapon, and sheer will. She hoisted 1 SEAL across her shoulders, fireman's carry, while dragging the other by his vest. Step by step, she staggered through the desert. The sun blazed by day, freezing winds cut by night, and enemy patrols hunted the area. More than once, she had to press both men into the sand and cover them with her body as convoys rolled past. Her muscles screamed, her lips cracked with thirst, and sleep clawed at her, but she refused to stop. On the second night, an enemy scout stumbled upon them. With no time to reach her rifle, Emily pulled her combat knife and struck in silence, the blade flashing in the moonlight. The man fell without a sound. She dragged the body into the dark and kept moving. On the 3rd day, the base finally appeared on the horizon, a cluster of fortified walls rising from the barren land. Emily nearly collapsed at the sight, but she pressed on. Step after step, her boots dragged trenches into the dust. When she finally reached the gate, the guards froze. A lone figure approached, caked in blood, dirt, and sweat. Across her shoulders, she carried 1 SEAL, limp and pale. With her other arm, she dragged the second, his vest nearly torn from his body. She stumbled, then straightened, refusing to fall until she had delivered them both. The guards rushed forward, stunned. "That's Carter. She's supposed to be dead," one whispered. Medics swarmed, lifting the wounded away. Soldiers gathered, jaws dropping, some too shocked to speak. Emily's face was pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. But her voice was calm as she muttered, "They weren't going to die on my watch." Then finally, she collapsed to her knees. Word of her return spread across the base like wildfire. They called her the Ghost of Helmand, the soldier who had been declared dead but walked back into camp carrying 2 of America's finest on her shoulders. Her quiet strength silenced the skeptics. Command, once convinced of her death, now stood in awe, and the lesson her story carved into every heart was clear. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's carrying the weight of others when your own strength is gone. It's refusing to quit, even when the world writes your ending before you do. Emily Carter proved that when responsibility meets belief in oneself, even the impossible can be overcome. The streets of Fallujah burned with the chaos of war. Dust choked the air, smoke curled from shattered windows, and the crack of rifles echoed through the concrete maze. To most, the city was a nightmare, a place where every doorway hid death. But to Staff Sergeant Rachel Hayes, it was just another mission. She looked like any other Army Ranger attached to the Navy SEAL team. Helmet snug, M4 rifle gripped tight, boots pounding against broken pavement. To those who didn't know her, she blended in. Another soldier swallowed by the relentless churn of battle. But the war didn't let soldiers remain ordinary for long. The team moved street by street, clearing insurgent strongholds 1 room at a time. It was grueling work. Kick in the door, flashbang, storm inside, check every corner, move on. Rachel had done it so many times her body moved on instinct. Yet even instinct couldn't stop what came next. An explosion tore through the building she entered, collapsing walls in an instant. Smoke and fire filled the air. The blast cut communications, and when the dust settled, command declared her gone. Staff Sergeant Rachel Hayes, KIA. But Rachel wasn't dead. Trapped beneath debris, bruised and bleeding, she clawed her way out of the rubble. Every movement sent fire through her ribs, but she refused to give in. She could hear gunfire outside, the screams of allies pinned down. Somewhere nearby, 2 SEALs were stranded and bleeding out, cut off from the rest of the team. If she didn't reach them, they wouldn't survive the night. The stakes couldn't have been clearer. If she failed, the SEALs would die, and command would never even know they had been abandoned. Panic rippled through what was left of the SEAL squad. "She's gone," one man muttered, his voice edged with despair. "We can't reach them." Fear seeped in, a poison that spread quickly even among hardened fighters. Rachel herself felt the bite of that fear. Her hands trembled as she remembered Kandahar years earlier, when she'd lost 2 Rangers in an ambush. She had carried the weight of that failure every day since. For a heartbeat, she wondered if history was repeating itself. But then, through the pain and smoke, she found her resolve. She forced herself to her feet, blood streaking her face, and whispered under her breath, "Not again." "Not this time." She steadied her voice, calling out over the radio fragments she could salvage. "I'm still here, and I'm going for them." It wasn't arrogance nor bravado. It was quiet determination, the kind forged in fire and sharpened by loss. The build-up began. She checked her weapon, half a magazine left in her M4, 1 grenade, a combat shotgun slung across her back. Her gear was battered, her body bruised, but her spirit locked in. She took a deep breath, her ears tuning into the smallest details, the shuffle of boots across broken tile, the whisper of enemy voices through thin walls, the metallic click of a bolt being chambered nearby. Every sense heightened, the world slowing to a razor's edge focus. Moving through alleys, she became a shadow. She marked her targets with surgical precision, knowing each wasted bullet could cost her life. She adjusted for every angle, every corner, every ounce of cover. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she drew closer to the trapped seals. The impossible moment arrived when she burst through a ruined doorway, shotgun blasting point blank. She cut down 2 insurgents before they could react, the blast reverberating through the shattered walls. Switching to her M4, she picked off another across the street, her movements a blend of training and instinct. The room fell silent, except for the ragged breaths of the 2 injured SEALs. One had a bullet through his leg, the other a shoulder torn apart by shrapnel. Their eyes widened in disbelief when they saw her standing there, bloodied but alive. "You're supposed to be dead," one whispered. Rachel knelt beside them, pressing bandages into wounds with practiced hands. "Not today," she said simply. The decisive action wasn't over. Getting them out would take everything she had left. She slung 1 SEAL over her shoulders and half dragged, half carried the other, firing bursts as she moved. Enemies appeared in waves, but Rachel refused to stop. Her shotgun boomed in narrow hallways, her M4 barked in dusty alleys, and when both went empty, she drew her sidearm, steady and unshaken. At one point, cornered in a stairwell, she fought with nothing but her combat knife, her strength born of desperation. By the time she broke through to the open street, the SEALs could barely cling to consciousness. She was running on sheer will, her body threatening to collapse. Yet step by step she dragged them toward the U.S. base, refusing to surrender. Hours later, the gates of the compound loomed. Soldiers stationed there froze at the sight. A figure emerged from the smoke and rubble, staggering under the weight of 2 men. Dust and blood coated her uniform. Her helmet hung cracked at her side, yet her eyes burned with fire. "She's alive!" "One!" Marine gasped. Rachel stumbled forward, collapsing only after she had delivered the SEALs into the arms of medics. Around her, men and women stared in disbelief, unable to reconcile the reports of her death with the living warrior before them. The base erupted in whispers. The Iron Valkyrie, they called her, the woman who had risen from the rubble to carry her brothers home. When General David Petraeus heard the story, he ordered an immediate commendation. Standing before her, he saluted and said words she never forgot. "That's what American warriors look like." But Rachel herself never boasted. When asked how she had done it, she only shook her head and said softly, "Someone had to." The soldiers who witnessed her return would never forget that moment. It wasn't just about strength or skill or even survival. It was about responsibility, about refusing to leave anyone behind, no matter the odds. The lesson her story carried was clear. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing when your body begs you to fall. It's about fighting when the world declares you finished. It's about carrying others when you have nothing left for yourself. Rachel Hayes proved that limits are illusions, that belief in oneself can turn rubble into a battlefield of triumph, and that true warriors rise when the world thinks they've fallen.